It was a hot summer day when this story takes place. I had just gotten out of school that day and wanted to just drive around town to clear my mind. I would be graduating high school next year, and the pressures of college and the future plans were already draining on me. But driving around always seemed to help clear and balance my mind. I was driving around by myself. I brought a joint with me and started playing some old songs on the radio. I was driving near some backwoods. The trees and secludedness always helped ease my mind. I was driving slowly, enjoying the scenery, when I noticed someone up ahead. It was a young man, standing by the edge of the road with his thumb pointing backwards, a hitchhiker. In all of my backroad car trips, I've never once seen a hitchhiker before, and was quite honestly shocked to see it. I've heard so many horror stories about hitchhiking and hitchhikers that I thought it was universally accepted that no one does that anymore. Clearly I was wrong. I drove by him and saw a distraught look on his face. He seemed young, like 25. He had on jeans and a blue t-shirt. I drove past him, wondering where he needs to go, when I felt my heartstrings being pulled. Maybe it was the weed, or maybe it was me being naive, but I felt like it wasn't right to look into another human being's eyes, see that they needed help, and then do nothing about it. So, going against all my better judgment, I pulled a U-turn and drove back to the young man. I pulled up to him and asked him where he needed to go. He said only about 20 minutes north. I thought to myself that wasn't too bad and told him to get in. The guy got into my car, visibly happier. We started driving towards his destination. The guy's name was Mark. Mark said he had been there all day and was about to give up. He did not have a cell phone or anything, so he was not able to call an Uber or a Lyft. Mark said he had a car, but it was in the shop. He had to walk to and from everywhere, but recently his foot had been swelling and it made it hard for him to walk. His reason for hitchhiking seemed plausible, and the entire drive, I did not get any bad vibes or energies from him. Just a guy who simply needed a ride. We pulled up to a mobile home complex. He said his place was right there, on the left with the big front door. I dropped him off. He thanked me for the ride and handed me $20. I told him it was fine, but he insisted. So I took the money, told him to have a good rest of the day, and then drove off. Now here's where the story takes a turn. About a week later, I was over at one of my girlfriend's house. We were watching some reality TV show and eating junk food. My friend was flipping through the channels during a commercial when I told her to stop. It was the local news channel. There was a man being led out of a front door by police in a nearby mobile home complex. A creepy chill went down my spine. Being led out of his red front door in handcuffs was no other than Mark the hitchhiker. Confused and baffled, I listened intently as the news anchor explained the scene. Police had recently discovered over 5 bodies buried in the back of the mobile home. All of the bodies seemed to have some sort of relationship with Mark, and all of the bodies had his fingerprints on them. My mind could not grasp what I was hearing. The hitchhiker who I had helped was a serial killer, and I had no idea. I explained this to my friend, who saw the terrified look on my face. I could not believe it. Never once did I ever pick up a hitchhiker until Mark, and it turns out he's a serial killer. It's safe to say, guys, that I am never picking up a hitchhiker again. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania. It's located right outside of Philadelphia, but surprisingly enough, is surrounded by woods and trees. I'm a recently single mom, and I was on my way home from Walmart picking up baby formula. And I was driving down a back road about 15 minutes from my house when I saw a small child standing on the side of the road. It was a young boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, holding his thumb out like he was hitchhiking. I could not believe it. I did not see any adult or older sibling around him. He seemed completely alone. I decided to pull over and see if the young child needed help. I rolled down my window and asked the kid if he was okay. The young boy shook his head no and said that he was separated from his parents and needed a ride to his house at once. My motherly instincts kicked in, and I told the boy to get in and I would gladly take him to his house. The boy got in. His eyes were red from crying. I felt so bad and still could not believe he was out here by himself alone. The young boy's name was Tim, and he said his parents' house was only a few miles from here. I told him no problem, and he directed me the entire way. About 5 minutes into driving, Tim said to pull over. It was a vacant parking lot surrounded by trees. There were no cars, no houses, no signs of civilization anywhere. I asked Tim if this is the correct place, and he shook his head yes. I immediately started to think something was off. Tim opened the car door and got out. He waved his hand at me and told me to follow him. I was still in the car, confused and wondering if the poor boy had some kind of issues, because this clearly was not where he lived, or anyone for that matter. While I was thinking about this, about 10 people emerged from the woods. They saw my parked car and started to come closer. I was freaking out at this point. I had no idea who they were and if they knew Tim or not. My motherly instincts were still on high alert, and I called out of the window for Tim to come back to me and get into the car. These people looked rough. None were smiling, and quite frankly, they looked like they were up to no good. But what shocked me was what I heard one of the men say. The man in front of the group said, "Good job, Tim, for leading her here to us. We can take over from here." And that's when I noticed what the group of people had in their hands. They all had rope, duct tape, and trash bags. I immediately slammed on the gas pedal. The group of people were so close to my car that I actually hit 2 of them pretty hard, speeding off. I did not care. I had to get away from those people ASAP. When I got home and allowed my nerves to calm down, I decided to do some research. Apparently, there are certain gangs and cults that use small children to lure people into a secluded area. The popular way they do this is having a child pretend to hitchhike, hoping a caring person will come to the rescue. I could not believe it, and to this day, I am still horrified at the whole experience. What kind of world do we live in where people will exploit children like this? And if that was how that gang or cult or whatever they were treated the child, then I cannot imagine what they would have done to me. It's safe to say that I will never pick up another hitchhiker, ever again. This story happened to my father when he was 21. Things were different back in his day, and people were not as cautious as they are now when it comes to hitchhikers. Here is the way my father tells it. He was driving home from work one afternoon when he saw a hitchhiker on the side of the road. And at this point, my father had picked up dozens of hitchhikers. He always saw it as planting a good seed. You do something nice for someone, and you reap a reward. So anyway, my dad sees the hitchhiker and pulls over to pick him up. He was a young guy, around my father's age as well. My dad asks where he's headed and starts to drive in that direction. About 10 minutes into the drive, the hitchhiker starts to get nervous. His hands were twitchy and his eyes were fluttering like mad. My father decided to ask if he was okay when the man pulled out a revolver and pointed the gun at his head. The hitchhiker said that he was robbing my father and to pull over the car now or he would blow his brains all over the place. My dad, who was a hothead and still is to this day, said over his dead body. My father then proceeded to grab the muzzle of the gun. It went off right by his ear, and to this day, he is still partially deaf because of that. My father continued to wrestle the gun out of the hitchhiker's hand, even while he was driving. The scuffle happened for about 30 seconds. Another shot went off this time, hitting my dad in the bicep, but my father still somehow managed to outmuscle the hitchhiker, and when my dad had full control of the gun, the hitchhiker jumped out of the speeding car, tumbled on the asphalt, and then sprinted away into the woods. To this day, my father's ear is still partially deaf, and he cannot lift more than 30 pounds with his right bicep. It's a story that he tells us over and over to warn us about trusting people and picking up hitchhikers. And even to this day, my dad says that if he ever saw that hitchhiker again, he would beat the ever-living hell out of him. Yeah, my dad's a badass, but the lesson still rings true. Don't ever pick up hitchhikers.